Well, welcome everyone. This is Navigating Barriers for Successful DBI Implementation. Um, this webinar is brought to you through the National Center on Intensive Intervention. Really, our mission with NCII is to support uh, state and local leaders and other educators and professionals around implementing data-based individualization, which is a overall process for identifying and supporting students with intensive intervention. So that's going to be part of the focus for today. My name's Jason Harlacher. I'm a technical assistance provider for NCII. I'm also the director of our MTSS center that we run through the American Institutes for Research. So I'm in Denver. You can tell by the photo I don't normally have purple bruising on my face. I had a surgery recently, so I'm still recovering from that. So forgive me for not healing as quickly as I thought I would. But glad that you all could make this. My background's in school psychology, so I've spent years working as a school psych, working with eligibility and identifying students and supporting them with intensive needs, and then kind of progressed up from local level to district level, state level. I've worked with the Colorado Department of Education for a few years, and now I work more broadly on the national level with American Institutes for Research. So I'm curious. It is, of course, the beginning of the year, so I'm going to ask about New Year's resolutions. I'm going to ask that you share a resolution you wouldn't do. Often people think about new habits and so forth, but I'm curious, what's one you would not do? So if you could share in the chat your name, your role, your location, and then a New Year's resolution that you wouldn't do. On the call, I also have Amy Peterson, who leads NCII along with Sarah Arden, and then Kat Merkel is another colleague working on NCII as well. So they'll be working in the background to support this webinar and make sure everything goes off smoothly. Throughout the webinar, please use the chat to share kind of comments or reactions. And then there's also the Q&A feature on the webinar that you can submit more formal questions that you might have. Let me just there we go. There's the Q&A. So, um, all right. So Boulder, good to see Shannon. I recognize your name just down up the road from me. We've got, let's see, I'm with Kim, Never Give Up Coffee. We got some folks from New York, Chicago. I'm just now realizing that's you, Kat. I was going to get all excited and talk about the Bears, but we did that earlier. Let's see. Tennessee, welcome. Some folks from Washington, Vegas. Susanna actually was a school psych in Reno up in Washoe for several years. Welcome to Georgia. We got another Illinois. So, Amy, we can talk Bears later. Let's see. So some good things never to give up. Sherry, welcome from Oregon. Got my doctorate at University of Oregon, so always nice to see some Oregon folks. All right. Walla Walla, Washington. I always think of that old Mike Birbiglia joke, if you've heard that one. So, all right. Well, thanks everyone. We're going to start with a little bit of an activity to introduce the content here. So what I want you to do is just find some scrap paper and a pen or a pencil nearby you and just copy the 9 dots that you see on the screen in the same format. So if you see that diagram, just take a 15 seconds and recreate that diagram on some scrap paper, and then I'll give you some additional instructions here. And Kat and Amy, feel free to play along. I'm sure you saw this as you saw the slides here. So I can't see anyone to give me a thumbs up, but I'll give you a few more seconds. Just recreate that diagram there. All right. So what I want you to do is to spend a few minutes and see if you can solve this problem I'm about to give you. With those 9 dots, I want you to connect all 9 dots using 4 straight lines. The catch is you can't lift your pencil or paper or excuse me, you can't lift your pencil or pen from the paper once you start, and you can't retrace any lines. So can you connect all nine with four straight lines without lifting your pen from the paper? I'm gonna give you about 30 seconds to try that. Okay. So does anyone, before I kind of reveal different ways that you could solve it, was anyone able to do it if you could share in the chat, or did you get frustrated and stop? So Rachel said yes. Rachel, one dot left for Sherry, Amy, and Rachel. If either of you could share how you did it or how you solved it. I know it's a little tough not being able to just show it, but
I let Amy come off mute if Amy wants to share.
oh, okay.
Oh, maybe not.
Going beyond the dots. Yeah. So
Yep.
there's a couple.
I went beyond the dots up to the far straight through a diagonal to the corner and then
Right.
across the bottom, but beyond. And then yeah, so I'm
Yeah.
sure you're gonna show us that one.
Yeah. I think I'm gonna show probably what you did. Yeah. Let's see. Anyone else get it or anyone else? Yeah, hope that I gave up. Yeah. So I got three different ways that you could solve it. One is probably what we just heard, where you start and kind of go outside the bounds of the nine dots. So you're able to draw almost like a little umbrella looking image there. That's one way, probably the one of the more common ones. And then another is you actually just use three and you just get very wide going back and forth. Um, and then if you're a fan of the Matrix and thinking really outside the box, I always think of there is no spoon, but maybe there is no flat plane. If you drew it on a piece of paper and then rolled it, and then as you held your pen, you were rolling the paper along the different way. So a couple different ways that you could approach this, and probably what you've noticed is it took a little bit of creativity. I think a lot of people, their initial thought is to stay within kind of the three by three setup there, but as you can see, to solve it, you have to go kind of beyond the bounds of the image or the kind of structure of the dots there. And so it just raises what we're going to talk about today is having flexibility and creativity as it comes to solving implementation challenges that you might experience when it comes to database individualization. Now, we'll talk about technical versus adaptive challenges for this webinar, and you can certainly apply some of those throughout um, other sort of implementation issues within education here. But we're primarily going to talk about technical versus adaptive challenges with DBI and then go through some different strategies to develop adaptive solutions. So before we dive into all of that, I want to just start with getting us all on the same page in terms of what do we mean when we say DBI or database individualization. So this is the structure, the framework that we train on through NCII, and really it's just a pretty systematic method for determining when and how to provide intensive interventions to students. It involves providing those intensive interventions and then modifying them using progress monitoring data and fidelity data to make sure we're matching what students need and that they're benefiting from it. So we're going to go through the graphic here on the right, which is the DBI process, and we'll go through each of those steps. So as we go through this, I'm sure a lot of this will sound familiar to you. So I want you to think about, how does it fit within my current context? We might be using slightly different terminology, but it all, I'm sure, aligns with a lot of the things that you're currently doing in school, which involves providing good instruction and interventions to students, and then using data to track that progress. So um, there are 5 steps within DBI. It starts with step 1, which is providing a good, solid intervention program to students. And that program requires just a couple of things to really be a solid intervention. One, it's evidence-based, so it shows that there is some evidence showing it benefits the students that we're providing it to. And then we have standardized processes to provide it. So standard processes for identifying students that receive it, but then a pretty straightforward standard format in terms of how we provide and deliver that to students. And usually a good question when we say that is, well, when do we individualize, or why don't we individualize? And the answer is, one, we individualize later on in the DBI process. But two, we know that when we provide a standard high quality intervention to students who are at risk, or students who need additional support, about 70 to 80% of those students respond to that intervention and don't need additional support. So we can kind of filter out students who need more intensive needs, or we can really limit the number of students that we have to devote additional resources to by using a really good quality intervention. So standardized and evidence-based, we obviously match that intervention to a skill need that they have, and then we're providing that intervention with fidelity. So at step 1, we provide all of that. And then at step 2, we're gathering progress monitoring information to determine, is that intervention working or not, or to what extent is that intervention working? So you can see in the graphic, we'll gather that progress monitoring information, and then make decisions around how responsive or non-responsive is that student. Ideally, they are responsive, and then we can have the student experience success with that intervention. But if they're not responsive, then we would move into that lower half of the graphic, where we get into steps 3 to 5. And step 3 starts with gathering diagnostic information. So if we have a student not progressing, our first question is, well, why aren't they growing as much as we would like, or as much as we had hoped? So we gather diagnostic information to develop a reason or a hypothesis as to why they may not be progressing. That information helps us inform the changes that are needed for that student. So here's where we really individualize and intensify the intervention for the student. So we gather diagnostic information. Typically, that is information around the skills the student has mastered and not mastered. It's around the instruction they're receiving in terms of opportunities to respond, the amount of feedback they get. We would gather information on the environment, the setting, looking at, are we using good classroom management practices? Are we providing a lot of feedback and acknowledgement for pro-social skills, or for the skills that are being taught to them? So we really look at the context, not just of the student skills, but also the environment, the instruction, the curriculum that they're receiving. All looking at, well, why aren't they making as much growth as we would like? From that information, we then get a good estimate or hypothesis as to why they're not progressing. And then, as you can probably guess, we then make those changes to the intervention. So if our hypothesis is there's not enough explicit instruction being used, we would then modify the intervention and instruction to increase the amount of explicit instruction. If our hypothesis is that we're not targeting the right skills, then we would modify or adapt that intervention to target the skills more. Or if there's not enough opportunities to respond, and that's why they're not progressing, we would modify based on that. So we would make those changes. And then, just like in step 2, we would then gather progress monitoring information to to determine, are they responding or not. So you can kind of see this iterative process where, you know, If they're responsive, great. If they're not responsive, we're going to go back and get a new hypothesis and figure out, okay, what didn't we get right? Why isn't this student progressing there? So a pretty systematic method. You can see it combines instruction and assessment together and really looking at how do we pinpoint exactly what's going on with students and how do we make them successful in their setting. So that is all 5 steps of DBI. Again, I think that a lot of you probably have a lot of these pieces in place or something very similar. I tend to think of this graphic as the first 2 steps as being our tier 2 processes and interventions, and the bottom half, steps 3 to 5 of DBI being the tier 3 or the more intensification process for students. So I want you to take a minute and just kind of reflect on what you do in your school. What are some common barriers or challenges you've encountered when implementing DBI or when providing interventions to students? And just go ahead and use the chat to put those in. I love this. Looks like we have a great, I'm scrolling back through the chat, people all over the US, even someone from Taiwan. So it must be very late or very early for you. Let's see. So collaboration time, lack of consistent data, finding time in the day. Yeah, Carlo's mentioning probably a common one, right? We need more time or special education is the answer. Um, Staffing seems to be a common theme. Lesson data literacy. Yeah, supporting our teams. Yeah. That's a good one, Rachel. So supporting our teams that responding to student need isn't just one-time thing, right? That problem solving and supporting students is an ongoing process. Um, hmm. Amy Warren's got an interesting one. Yeah, kind of supporting students with just completing work versus really tier 3 to teach skills and close that gap. And I'm sure that's probably as you get older in grades, you probably see more of that because now they're trying to really, you got to start focusing on credits and graduation as well. So yeah, they don't respond. Let's jump to a special education referral. Yeah, and that certainly could be appropriate, but I think, Dana, you're probably speaking to we're leaving out the whole ongoing problem solving piece there. Yeah. Yeah, so we'll keep these in mind as we kind of go through things, but some very real challenges here. We've got, perhaps lack of time in the day, lack of the right tools, and then a lot around, um, or like scheduling, but then a lot around sort of making it fit within, got limited resources, maybe some beliefs around intensification and using data. So this all raises, we have things that we want to implement, different ways that we want to support students. And so when implementing DBI, it really, there are sort of 2 pieces to consider. One is there is a technical piece to DBI where we have to have staff use new assessments or learn to use certain assessments. There's different interventions or practices that they have to learn. But then there's this adaptive piece of making it fit and work within your system. So you kind of see some of that in terms of the mindsets or beliefs or some of the resource conversation in the chat there. And so buying tools, buying new interventions are pretty straightforward, but then applying and using that within your current system and context is where it requires some of those adaptive solutions. So I want to spend some time talking about the difference between the two and sharing some examples. And as you're listening, I want you to think of which one of these do you experience more within your school site or within your district. So technical problems are the easier ones to solve. The problem really exists because there's some sort of lack of knowledge or technology or practice that we're missing. And so the solution is often buying something or having someone come in and share that knowledge. There's a skill gap or a knowledge gap that we have to close. So if we think of a medical example, if you have high blood pressure, one way to lower it would be to take medication. There is some sort of pill out there that you could take that would address the problem. Um, and then within education, perhaps you're teaching students a certain skill, or you want to teach students a certain skill, and you don't have an intervention that does that. So you're missing that technology or that program. So you go out and buy that. So now you have solved this technical problem. So it's a solution that's kind of outside of our current setting. It's some sort of solution that is out there, and we bring an expert in a manner of speaking to solve it. So that's a technical problem, but often what we see in schools are adaptive challenges. Um, and these are a little bit harder to notice or to see, um, or they're harder to solve because the problem is within our system and it requires some sort of change in flexibility or creativity or beliefs about how we're functioning. So, I'm even thinking of Lana, if I'm saying your name correctly, the staff lack of expertise. Well, I guess that might be a technical one, but maybe there's some sort of beliefs tied in there that might indicate an adaptive challenge. But if we think of the medical example of high blood pressure, you could take a pill and lower, but probably also what needs to happen is some sort of change in your lifestyle to overall reduce your high blood pressure. You could take that pill as a technical solution, but maybe also it requires a change in lifestyle, day-to-day practice that's a little harder to do to lower that blood pressure. For an education example, if we're buying an intervention, that's a technical solution, but then maybe we need to adjust the schedule or adjust people's roles. We have to expand how we do sort of our day-to-day so that we can implement that intervention. There's some sort of flexibility or creativity that might have to happen. So hopefully you're seeing kind of the contrast where one is sort of a simple, yeah, let's go buy something or add something, whereas the other one, the adaptive challenges are more changing what we're currently doing to make something fit. So I want to go through some examples, and then we'll have some time to talk through kind of what you all see and experience within your site. So if I think of the 5 steps for DBI, so I just gave this example around, at step one, maybe we're missing an intervention, so we have to buy an intervention to address a common need. That would be the technical solution. Whereas for an adaptive, again, might be adjusting the roles so they coordinate use of that intervention. For steps 2 and 5, again, maybe you don't have a progress monitoring tool for a certain reading skill or a certain math skill, so that needs to be bought and the staff need trained on that. Whereas an adaptive challenge at step 2 and 5 could be, well, maybe we have to adjust certain teaming structures so they start examining progress monitoring data as part of that day to day. And maybe that touches on some of the beliefs around progress monitoring versus monitoring progress. And real quickly, progress monitoring is sort of that formal measurement of a student's skills towards an identified goal using really technically adequate measures, whereas monitoring progress is a little more informal. It's more formative assessment of just checking to see if students are learning the content that you're teaching. It's more of a day-to-day monitoring. But you can see again, the technical side is buying something, that adaptive side is around kind of a discussion around beliefs or challenging sort of current structures that are in place. For step 3, again, administering a diagnostic data tool, perhaps to pinpoint a student's skills. So we're administering something new here to figure out what the issue is around the student's growth. Whereas perhaps we need a change, adaptive challenge might be a change in people's beliefs around what information to gather. So we'll talk a lot about NCII, we'll talk a lot about gathering information on the instruction, the curriculum, and or the environment. to figure out the context and why students aren't progressing. And so there might need to be a discussion around the importance of those variables and why that information is critical for supporting students. And then I'll share one more slide here. When you're adapting interventions, people mentioned adding time, right? To me, that's kind of a technical solution. We add more time to a student's plan to give them more practice with the skill. But perhaps we have to talk through some of the beliefs, though, that go through with that. So some of you were mentioning that in the chat around students don't respond. We're going to send them to special education for a referral right away, right? But perhaps what we need is a conversation around collaborating so we can support more of those adaptations, or around the belief all students can learn given the right support. It's not something that special education solves, or maybe the belief is we have to collaborate to solve that. So we need special education, but we also need general education as well to work together to collaborate. So I'm just going to give you all a second to kind of reflect on that. I have more examples on the screen here of technical versus adaptive, kind of for the same problem here. But I'm just curious, reactions or thoughts as you kind of process technical challenges versus, or technical problems versus adaptive challenges. So if you want to share thoughts or react in the chat, or if you want to come off mute, we'll look for raised hands. I'm guessing, Kat, you can see all that?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
I don't see anything yet, though.
I don't necessarily see people are muted, but yeah, adaptive is more challenges. So we're going to talk more about that because it's not obvious how to solve it. Um, Data collection and analyzing time. Let's see. Data collection, analyzing data could be complex and time consuming. Would this fall under adaptive column? Is my thinking correct? Um, yeah, I think, Lana, that's my first thought. It's more of an adaptive because it's finding the time um, and sort of valuing the importance of that data collection. Um, a technical problem around that would just be, do you have the right tools or do you have a data warehouse? But if it's getting people to get into the habit of looking at data and using it, that would be kind of my current thinking. Yeah. Hope, I think your thinking's right on there. There's, getting new materials is difficult. Um, Things are expensive, budgets are limited. But yeah, when they get the materials, then there's challenges getting people to use it and get up to speed. I um I worked as a school psych in one school, and they had a lot of um, funds that come through because they were in turnaround and state takeover and things like that. And I remember going and looking to see what are the interventions that we have. And I think they had upwards of like a dozen different interventions for like a given grade level because they just kept buying program after program. And that is throwing a technical solution at probably what is an adaptive challenge in terms of picking one and making it work. Yeah, that's a good thought, Sherry. Yeah. The technical kind of problem is that on ramp, and then you realize, oh, okay, I bought you the program, but now let's make it work. And then it becomes an adaptive kind of challenge. So we'll continue. I have this question in terms of what are some of those adaptive challenges? So people can just continue to share as you think about that question. But I think making it work within your context is a good example. But just curious, other sort of maybe indicators of adaptive challenges you've seen with DBI implementation or just with providing supports to students? Amy, I see your comment. I was just going to say, we're going to talk about those are connected. And then I realized you're the one that made the connection when we were putting this content together that you can have both. Yeah, clarity around what to de-implement. is a good one. So we're going to touch on that as well. Yeah. Uh, yeah, hope. It's that progress monitoring versus monitoring progress. So you're hitting on that adaptive challenge of what exactly constitute or doesn't constitute. Maybe that's a little bit of the technical solution. So you can hear they some of them these kind of butt into each other or blend together there. Yeah, that's a great one, Rachel. That's a big adaptive one. The mindset and sort of beliefs or values of that team when they get together. What do you focus on? Yeah. Dana, you're describing, I first thought a little bit of a technical challenge there, maybe with finding the time and then implementing with fidelity, but then there's probably a lot of logistical and adaptive challenges that go into that, adjusting schedules, finding that right schedule to balance. So, yeah, great. These are great. You all are spot on. Some good thinking here. Mhm. Oh, so I'm smiling, Lana. Yeah, the district infrastructure is so critical. Yeah. We need the district to define the procedures, and then schools can kind of customize within those procedures. So, um, let me share a few kind of indicators that you might see in a system that indicate there's some adaptive challenges going on. One is kind of this resistance to change. Um, Again, technical problems I think are fairly clear. You're missing something, but then these adaptive challenges requires maybe some clues that cue you in that there's a larger adaptive challenge going on. So um, the first one I think is resistance to change, which can look differently, look like a few things. So you might hear people acknowledge that change is needed, but then there's maybe excuses made to why something can't change. Maybe people are more direct and just say, I'm not going to change what I'm doing. I know that we usually hear, well, this is the latest thing, so I'll just kind of wait it out. Maybe they don't quite say it that bluntly, but sort of this is the new thing in education. If I just wait, it'll go away on its own. People might ask, well, why are we doing this? Do we really need to change this? Or people might say or think, well, things are working okay right now for me, so I don't see the reason to change. Not necessarily out of being malicious, but if you've figured out a system and it's working for you, then there's not really a lot of motivation to do things different. So there's just kind of this, yeah, things could be better sort of attitude, but there's no real motivation to change. So that's one. I think a second is leadership, kind of talking the talk, but not walking the walk. So they support the change, but you don't see a lot of action. So they might be in a meeting, yeah, we could do this or we should do that, but then they don't, you know, have that follow through or any action steps. So there might be, yeah, we should change the schedule, or we could build time in for collaboration, but then things just kind of continue as usual. I know I've worked with a lot of schools and districts where they sort of get the verbal commitment to, MTSS or to implement something, but then when it comes to asking for real change, when for changes in schedule or money or so forth, then nothing really kind of gets moving after that. Um, I think this one also you might see where there's almost this avoidance of saying what's on your mind directly, particularly when you're in meetings or having larger group discussions. Um, it's almost not okay to verbalize some of the internal thoughts or perspectives that the staff is having. um, Almost as if two conversations occur. You have one meeting or one all staff meeting where people say some things, or maybe you're discussing how to fix an issue and some information is shared. But then when that meeting is over, everyone goes and has their own little one-on-one conversations and they're a little more open and honest in those conversations. So there's almost Um, one conversation that's okay to have publicly, and then privately, it's a little more genuine and real. So often this is just a sign, I think, of people not feeling comfortable or safe to discuss things. So there's not this open transparency. So therefore, people kind of avoid saying what's on their mind. And then you'll probably see some shifting of responsibility. People look for reasons as to why things are the way they are versus discussing ways to solve them. So when you're sitting in meetings or discussing students, perhaps you're focused on explaining away things as opposed to really problem solving and focusing on solutions. I think someone's comment in the chat earlier got to that, where you want to see more conversations on the solutions. And for me, this one's really about just hearing that ownership, so I can do saying things like, I can do this, or we could try this, as opposed to looking for reasons why something might be occurring. So I think a lot of people are kind of hitting on this already in the chat, but some of the challenges that you have, do you view them as more technical or more adaptive, or as we touched on, a little bit of both? I'll just kind of scroll up and around here. Yeah, Rachel says both. Yeah. Uh, yeah, pretty clear, huh? Adaptive. Yeah. Yeah, often we don't need, I think we've reached a point in education where we have the technology, we have the skills, we have the interventions, we know what good instruction is, and it just comes down to how do we make it work, particularly when you have limited time, energy, resources. Yeah, you got both. Yeah. So I want to spend um, the next bit of our time on really then how do we solve this? What are some of the solutions that we can get into? So finding solutions for that. I really like this quote. This one, it's almost like people think it reminds me of like throwing money at a problem. You know, the most common leadership failure stems from trying to apply technical solutions to adaptive challenges. And I can remember working in the schools years ago. I was actually in Reno, and there was a student who struggled with social skills, struggled to make friends in their school. This was an elementary age student, and they were probably, I want to say around third grade, but a very affluent family. And so I'll never forget one day coming in, and essentially the problem was the student wasn't able to form bonds with classmates and have genuine friendships. And the parent came in probably with about $500 worth of toys. It was Legos, basketballs, like all these really expensive toys. And the parent came in, gave all of that to the parent, excuse me, to the principal, and said, I want my student to take these out at recess so that kids will play with them. Very well intentioned, but a very good example of a technical solution for probably what was an adaptive challenge, where I will just give my kid all these toys and people will play with him, as opposed to working more on maybe some of those social skills for the student. So, how can we find good adaptive solutions? What are some of the things to keep in mind as we approach this? Um, Sorry, Amy, I'm looking at your comment here. Yeah, so much out there and researched around a lack of materials, but it yeah, likely is an adaptive issue. It kind of reminds me of when people are looking for a schedule and they ask, can you give me an example of a schedule? And it's like, yes, I could give you a schedule as a technical solution, but really schedules are all adaptive. They have to fit your context. And so then it's really an adaptive issue there. So with finding adaptive solutions, um, I think the key part, I'm going to share about 4 tips here, 5 tips. But it's all about the leadership anchoring the staff on here's what is going to stay the same, and then here's what we need to change. I think the biggest part with change is people being unsure what's going to happen and what's not going to happen. So it begins with the leadership defining, here's what's working, here's what we want to focus on. This isn't going to change. And then here are the things that we want to change. And so we're open to what that might look like. So 5 tips for those solutions. One is taking kind of this bird's eye view or taking a view from the balcony. So your system is designed to get the results it's currently getting. Systems are not accidental. They don't accidentally fall into solutions or into results. They're designed that way, good, bad, or indifferent, to get the results you're currently getting. So one of the first things leadership and staff can do is step back and look at all the different dynamics surrounding a challenge before moving forward, really understand the totality of the system. So for DBI, this could be looking at Gen Ed's role as it relates to interventions and vice versa. This could be seeing how different data sources play into the system or the different data sources you have. This could be looking at all the teaming structures you have and how they communicate or don't communicate. But it's overall seeing the big picture and then kind of the pros and cons of what's in place. Really getting a good stock of what is working and not working within your system. And then from there, I think it's building bridges. Um, there's a quote by Greenberg, who does a lot of adaptive leadership, but they said, so often we make problems about people, but people are just showing different perspectives on a challenge. And so leaders want to understand the different perspectives, and then rather making it personal, building the bridges across those different boundaries. So, um, Gen Ed might see a situation one way and special ed might see it a different way. And so it's looking at both of those perspectives authentically and trying to make sense of how they're seeing that situation. So with DBI, this could entail understanding people's perspectives on the intervention and how things need coordinated to achieve implementation. For example, um, with core instruction and interventions, does the core teacher and interventionist understand each other's perspective and how they're both working towards the same goal? We're both trying to support students and teach them skills. So how do we coordinate and work together? I think this building bridges involves attacking my kids versus your kids mentality and really looking at the coordination among interventions. Let's see. So taking a view from the balcony, building those bridges. And then a third one is really looking at change and reframing that resistance to change to resistance to loss. Um, we're asking people often when we're implementing DBI or implementing different systems to give up something. And that could be something that they've gotten used to and they're comfortable with. So letting people name the loss and sit with that and understand what is being changed. Let people essentially mourn the changes in that system. And so, what are some of the changes that happen from DBI that need discussed? And I know there's this feeling of if I'm going to work with students and then send them down the hall to work with someone else, I'm giving up kind of my comfort with that. And so letting people talk through that and be mindful and respectful of that's a genuine feeling of having to trust other colleagues to a new extent or to a certain extent to support your students. So there's obviously a lot of different changes and loss that might come along with implementation, but that could be one example there. Two more for you. The next one is finding that sweet spot for change. So the graphic on the right is really illustrating there's this zone of kind of optimal or productive change. So a little bit of anxiety will motivate people to solve a problem, but too much anxiety can cause us to kind of shut down and be frustrated. So there's this threshold where below which learning doesn't occur and no changes are made. But then there's also this limit for how much change people can tolerate before they kind of tune out or shut down. So we want to find that just enough anxiety and feeling uncomfortable to motivate change without tipping people too far to where it sort of collapses on itself. And then a large part of the adaptive challenges is just reflecting on what is happening and having continuous learning. You're going to implement something and you'll hit barriers or it may not go as well as anticipated. So allowing that trial and error and allowing space for that is important here. So, and I like to summarize all these with, if you've all seen the complex change model, which comes from a couple of folks in the business world. Um, but within this graphic, it illustrates kind of what the ingredients are for change to happen. So within the darker red boxes, you can see there's 5 different pieces that, if are all present, ideally it results in change. And then if one of those is missing, there's some sort of emotion that the staff might experience that makes the change difficult. So for example, um, without a vision, without a direction, the staff might be confused and ask, well, why are we doing this? What is the point of this change that you're asking us to do? If we're not training and providing them with the skills needed for the change, there might be some anxiety around, well, how can I do this if I don't know what to do or how to do it? There might be some reluctance or resistance if the incentives or the benefits of the change aren't clear. If you're asking them to implement DBI and collaborate and intensify interventions, they need to understand the benefits, not just for students, but also for themselves as staff members and for the school as a whole. And then, of course, without the right resources, you can be frustrated. And without a clear action plan, there can be this sort of false start where we jump into the water and then we don't know the next step beyond there. So, a nice sort of graphic. I'm curious with you all with these sort of 5 different tips. Which of these strategies is most needed within your site that you can think of? If you want. Yeah, I was thinking, Teresa, people might say, yeah, each one of those. And some of these are really the um, leadership ones, like building bridges, taking a view, but there are also ones that we can, excuse me, engage in as individual staff members, certainly reframing how we think of change or the continuous learning. Yeah, the sweet spot, Shannon, with integrating with other initiatives, right? Like, can't do everything. Yeah. Mm. The sweet may not be what you anticipated. Yeah, that's a good thought, Walter. Yeah, it's the adaptive challenges and finding those solutions. It's just this letting people be uncomfortable and forcing them to think differently or to approach things a little bit different. We can't just add something to the situation to solve it. We have to sort of reflect and find that solution within. Mhm. So I like I mentioned I work on the MTSS Center, so we try to use these questions when we're working with leadership around finding solutions. But I think of, we've mentioned district leadership and infrastructure in the chat, and I think district outlines kind of what parameters schools should operate within. And so we can think of these questions as we're figuring out, well, what exactly do our schools need, or what do our staff need? And so I think you could reflect and ask yourself, okay, if our does our staff know what to do? So if we've defined what's expected, do they know what to do? And that might be, if they don't, that could be related to communication, perhaps to a technical issue or perhaps to an adaptive issue, but we didn't communicate expectations right now. Does our staff know how to do it? That's probably a technical issue if they don't know how to do it, if they don't know how to use a program or administer an assessment tool. That's training we can provide to teach them that skill. But then the last 2 questions, is your staff able to do it? So do they have the time, the resources, the structure? That's more adaptive. And then are they willing to do it? Is there enough buy-in and support and understanding for it? That could be an adaptive issue as well. And I'll credit Amy for this question here in terms of thinking of when we're finding solutions, you can ask yourself, okay, if we implement this thing, so let's say if DBI goes really well and is a great success, whose thinking and behavior would have to change? And so it's a nice way to think about or to get out what are those adaptive challenges? What are the beliefs and thinking that are challenges within our system? So I'll let you reflect on that one. I'm going to share one more quote and then just open up and see are there any other questions. But this kind of summarizes what we've touched on in terms of letting people sit with that uncomfortable feeling, which is hard for all of us who are probably problem solvers and want to solve things right away. But raising kind of the temperature and then letting people sit with that and see what solutions they come up with. So I'll let you read that quote. So, any questions or thoughts or reflections? We just have an event survey for you all to fill out here in about 2 minutes, but just burning questions. I don't. I'm a coach leader. Let's see. So, Frankie, for your question, when you say leaders, can you define that? You think in district or school? District leaders? Oh, gentle nudging. Um, I'm a big fan of I saw Kent McIntosh talk once and he talked about not to start with kind of what you want versus what someone else wants, but to start with common goals. So with the district leader, the common goal is probably about students being successful and schools being pleasant places to be. And then talking through, here's how I get to that goal. Tell me how you get to that goal. So it kind of opens up the conversation in a less defensive way. So I think starting with how do we each approach a very similar goal that we probably have? Um, and then I'm always a fan of just let the data talk, having really clear graphics that tell a story, and then just letting leaders look at that. Because I think once you present people with a problem defined by data, then they're fairly motivated to solve it once that problem's clear. Um, thought I saw another question, but maybe it disappeared. Um, okay. Feel free to put any other questions in there, but um, if you're tired of the chat or me talking, feel free to fill out that survey, or you could use the QR code, but I'm happy to answer any more questions or reflect on some thoughts that people might have. Yeah, how to move to action. Um, my thought is, I mean, one, just do it. Just just jump in and implement something. But I would say start small. I'm a big fan of sort of piloting with, for DBI piloting with a student or two before you go across the whole school, just because you might run into barriers that are much easier to navigate when it's in a pilot sort of structure as opposed to the whole school. There's just things that come up, adaptive challenges that come up that you can't foresee. So I would say start small, And for me, it's always gathering data and starting there. I think what makes implementation move forward is good data use and good data reflection. And so I would always start there and gather data on, are we implementing what we said? And how is it benefiting staff, students, or families? And if you can get data around those two questions, that can really, to me, move things forward.